So this is an interview I did with author Richard Sauder back in 2014, and this will be part two. I just posted part one a couple of days ago. He writes on underground bases, underground tunnels, basically in the underground world. And yes, there is a vast underground world in on underneath our earth, underneath the waters, underneath the seas. As the Bible tells us, there are things in the earth, there are things on the earth, there are things in the heavens, there are things in the seas. Meaning that there are living creatures. Many of them are intelligent that exist down there, which are not of the race of man. And this is the reason why I was interested in this subject. And for example, the Bible speaks of hell, and my interest is in, of course, in understanding. Hell was something that obviously God did not create in the beginning, but it came into existence at some point later after the beginning of creation. So that, of course, is the history of the origins of evil, its growth, its maturing over the many, many ages that have come and gone since before Adam and Eve were formed and placed in the Garden of Eden. So there is a prehistory, which of course is found in the pages of the Bible. And this is where we understand that these worlds, even though man today, like the U.S. military, for example, may be busy building some of these underground bases, but most of this underworld and even like worlds in the heavens, they were constructed a very, very long time ago, and many of them are created by some very evil creatures. They are known in the Bible today as principalities and powers, and that is who created them, not necessarily like corporations or the military or anybody that we can see with our eyes. These things are only the visible representation of evil powers that are actually controlling them. And it is these evil powers who once existed on this earth, even in the form of flesh and blood, and they were instrumental in creating these worlds which go right down to the depths of the earth itself.
It's just been going on for a long time, Paul.
I agree. I agree with you that this kind of activity has been going on for probably much longer than even you and I, who have a great deal of interest in this subject and also have done some studying on it. And, I have not done nearly as much as you have, but still, it's probably dates back further and it goes deeper, no pun intended, than either one of us can fathom at this time, and we probably
Well,
never.
you know, well, you know what? I was told by one source, and I didn't know what to think about this. Let me preface that by saying when I began my research, I didn't know the state of the art. And I happened to go to a public talk on a topic that was not even related to underground base construction or underground bases. And as I was listening to the man talk, I suddenly realized this man knows something about underground bases. He made a very brief, off topic, off the cuff remark that I'm sure most people didn't even pick up on. But the remark was sufficiently interesting that after the talk, I went up to him and asked if I could come to his office and converse with him privately. And he said, sure. So within the next week or two, I went to his office and talked to him briefly, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And I asked him about a certain place. I was living then in New Mexico. I asked him about a certain place that I suspected there might be an underground base. And I said, I think there's an underground base in such and such a place. He looked at me and he said, there is. I said, well, how deep is it? And he said, 1 mile. That blew me away. I thought he was pulling my leg. But I subsequently discovered as I continued the research and talking with other experts that 1 mile is just scratching the surface. These bases can go down 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. I don't know what the lower limit is. I had another source tell me that some of these bases can be 12 or 14 miles down. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not telling you that's the case. I'm saying that's what I was told. I do know for a fact they can be easily 1 mile underground, 2 miles, even 3 miles. But whether it can go down 12 or 14 miles, I can't tell you that for a fact. I haven't seen any documentation for that. However, I'm open to it, but I would say at least 1 mile, 2 miles up to 3 miles. Oh yeah, they can be real deep, and quite sophisticated technology,
Well, the technology. Let's talk
technologically.
about the technology here, because when you talk about something that deep,
Magnetic,
no, no,
magnetic
just 1 second.
technology.
What I was trying alluding to, Richard, was that if you were to build something, let's say a mile down, and let's say it's a mile cube, there's a lot of dirt that needs to be excavated. Okay, so how that portion of it, like, what happens to all the material that must of necessity need to be excavated, if they are building them that size? Like, is there
Well, let me
technology?
let me tell you.
Okay, go ahead.
Let me tell you. What happened at the same time that you had this sharp uptick in underground based construction? The construction of the interstate highway system in the United States. Now, what do you need to build interstate highways? Well, you need a lot of sand and gravel to make concrete. You just need untold thousands, probably millions of tons of sand and gravel. Now, where are you going to get all that sand and gravel from? Well, if you have machines grinding away around through solid rock underground, they're going to produce tons and tons of gravel. So there you go. You just use that gravel in constructing of highways. When you're undersea, I asked the same question as regards undersea. The question I was given is, well, you just mix it in a slurry, and this is quite common in the mining industry. Mix it in a slurry, pump it through a slurry pipe to the ocean floor and into a submarine canyon, an undersea canyon. Just flush it to the ocean floor directly.
Yeah, the
Or same.
oceans would probably be simpler to dispose of than it would be above ground.
Well, and in the literature that I saw, this was discussed very much, very openly, in some of the documents I got from the United States Army Corps of Engineers, that you simply take the excavated material and you spread it out. You can use it as gravel on roads or whatever. Especially in the western United States, there are a lot of gravel roads. So it's really not an issue at all. You don't make a big pile of, a 6,000 foot tall pile of gravel somewhere.
Right.
You use it. For example, I'll give you one example. The Monsanto underground base, which was first begun in the immediate post-World War II period, about 1948 or 49, something like that, which is right on the outskirts of Albuquerque, in the foothills of the Monsanto Mountains, and on the edge of the Kirtland Air Force Base and Sandia National Laboratory Complex. I've been told that entire mountain range, there's a substantial mountains. They're about 10 or 11,000 feet tall, and they stretch for miles north-south from the southeast quadrant of Albuquerque. They stretch south a good, I don't know, 50 miles or so. And I've been told that they are extensively tunneled out. One of the leading experts told me that in a semi-classified briefing, that underground base was described in terms that he related to me as vast, not big, not enormous, but just vast. It just sprawls. It's vast. The mountain chain is just honeycombed. And so they've been at that for over half a century now. And don't you know that at the very northern end of that mountain range, there's a large rock quarry?
Okay, that would certainly solve some problems, I guess.
You follow me?
Yeah.
I can give you other examples in my research of other examples of bases that I've researched, where either immediately adjacent to or in reasonably close proximity to places where there are major underground facilities, there are either major mines or rock quarries. So, and this is something I've run across in the literature too, of using mines and rock quarries as cover for underground installations, because you can conceal um, your underground excavation under cover of ordinary industrial activity. And the whatever is excavated, all the excavated rock, which comes out as gravel, mostly, you can plausibly explain as being produced by the mine or by the quarry. And then it can be sold. You see, there's a twofer.
Right.
Not only do you get rid of what you had of what you're doing, but crushed rock and gravel are commercially valuable commodities in themselves, which can be sold for and generate profits of many millions of dollars.
Right, right, right. So it becomes yeah, it's not a loss. It's also
Oh no, it's
generating
not a
an
loss.
income on the side.
It's another revenue stream.
And I think it was you. I heard you say this once too. That as some of these underground, digging is going on, that they also sometimes run into, the mother lode, so to speak, of precious metals as well, and then they are there's another source of income.
Well, Paul, let me tell you, I've talked to a number of people about the underground base at in the Sandias because I used to live in New Mexico, and one of the men that talked to me about that facility said that during the construction, because the Rocky Mountains, or the mountainous region of the western United States, is mineral rich. Those mountains have a lot of minerals, including gold. And in the construction of this underground facility in the Monsanto Mountains, which went on for years, and I believe it may continue to the present day, the generals in charge of the operation confiscated all of the gold that was mined in the course of digging the tunnels and things. And he gave me one example. At one time, well, when you make tunnels and things underground, to buttress the rock, you put in what are called roof bolts. And they're like long, strong steel rods that you screw into the rock to keep the rock from slabbing off and falling on your head. It strengthens the rock in the overhead and the roof of the tunnels and caverns and chambers.
Right.
So in the process of doing this work, of course, there's some welding involved, and they have to cut metal with acetylene torches and so forth. Don't you know that from time to time when they were doing this, because the rock was actually gold ore in some places, that the liquid gold would just run out of the rock and puddle on the floor, slabs of solid gold on the floor, because they would run into veins of gold every once in a while. And he told me that all of that gold was confiscated by the American military generals who were overseeing the project. Of course, they just enriched themselves. It's a classified project.
Right.
So I mean, who's going to know, right?
Exactly.
It's their gold. If they walk out with 50 pounds of gold every day, I mean, who's going to tell them no?
I guess they found El Dorado.
Yeah, so who's going to tell them no? And I'm sure that's happened more than once. And in fact, there's another revenue stream, right?
Yeah, totally.
And of course, in the case of the undersea basis, one of the possible functions of undersea basis that I've found discussed in the literature was just this: undersea mining. The ocean floor, in places, is quite rich in minerals, including the rock down in the subsea floor. And you can think of all kinds of minerals. Let's think of diamonds, or uranium, or gold, silver, platinum, whatever, or rare earth minerals. Some of the rare earth minerals are actually more valuable than gold or than diamonds. And so there's enormous mineral wealth, not only underground, but undersea as well. And if you have, in the process of constructing an undersea base, say you've done some preliminary core sampling, and the seafloor has been sampled, geologically all over the world for decades. The so-called Geoides program, which I reference in my third book, Underwater and Underground Bases, has drilled literally thousands of deep cores in the seafloor all over the world. So geologists have a pretty good idea of the mineral composition of the seafloor all over the world. The various geological strata, they have actual physical core samples. So if you want to put a secret nuclear missile base or a secret submarine base somewhere, or a secret joint extraterrestrial human base, 300 miles out to sea or 1,000 miles out to sea, why not pick a place where there's a very high probability of finding commercially valuable veins of gold or platinum or diamonds or whatever, rare earth metals, so that you get your base, but in the process of excavating your base, you'll also get millions or even billions of dollars worth of extremely valuable minerals that you can either sell quietly on the black market or, depending on the extraterrestrial faction you may be dealing with, you may make a deal with them. My understanding is, just anecdotally, that some of these extraterrestrial factions have a mining interest in the earth. One of the reasons they're interested in the earth is because there's certain minerals here.
Is it possible that they're not so much extraterrestrial as they are intraterrestrial?
Both. I think we have a variety of terrestrial beings, of course, the various human races, but I think there are also intelligent insect species here, intelligent reptilian species. And there's a good deal of evidence for that in mythology, and it looks like there are also intelligent amphibian and/or fish species here on this world, and have been for a long time. And there
so then this world is not necessarily, which of course is supported by the Bible, which I won't go into here, but that the intelligences that inhabit this planet, they're not limited to just surface-dwelling humans.
I don't think so, and I think that's been true for many thousands of years. And then we have a variety of terrestrial species that are not necessarily human, that may be native to this planet, going back a long time, also with great technological sophistication. Now, then, of course, there's a lot of evidence that indicates there are a variety of extraterrestrial species or races that are here as well. Some of the extraterrestrial races are human or human-like. Not all of them. Some of them seem to be insect-like or reptilian-like or
like in a Star Wars movie, you see all these different creatures.
I think Star Wars. Yes, Star Wars, of course, the producer or director of the Star Wars franchise is George Lucas. He's a well-known, very prominent Hollywood personality. But he also is a very high-level Freemason. Now, my research indicates that the Freemasons, at the highest levels, have a body of secret information, secret history that goes back thousands of years. To gain access to this, you have to be an insider at the highest levels of Freemasonry.
A lot of these guys, guys in Hollywood are, I suppose, they have access to information which they portray in their movies as fiction, which us average people don't have access to, and most people think that it's just fiction, but actually it's a depiction of nonfiction.
Yes, well, I think George Lucas would fall into that category, and I agree. I think James Cameron would fall into that same category, probably Steven Spielberg to an extent, and some of the others, whose names I don't know. I don't know every director in Hollywood,
right.
But those are a few of the famous ones. And
he was Stanley Kubrick.
Yes, he certainly would be in that number. But after his last film, Eyes Wide Shut, about these
the rituals
about these
of
secrets. Yes, these the
The
sexual
right,
rituals of the very p- powerful movers and shakers in politics and high finance and so forth. Um, he kind of blew the lid off of that, and his film premiered, and I think within a week or two he was dead.
right, yeah.
Um, I think someone killed Stanley Kubrick to shut him up. I think he was, he made a lot of films that were groundbreaking, but I think he came too close to an important truth about how the system works, and I believe he was killed to shut him up.
Yeah, but it's quite possible. These kind of things are. Yes, he was a healthy man. He was only in his early 60s or something. So for him to just, not that it cannot happen, but giving people heart attacks is of course one of the methods that are employed by these covert agencies, etc. That want to eliminate somebody and make it look like a natural cause. So it is quite
It happens all the time.
right.
It happens all the time, and there is a good deal of evidence for a sort of a hit squad that operates in Hollywood that takes out people for a variety of reasons. Going way back to the days of L. Ron Hubbard and even before, there's been a very dark undercurrent in Hollywood. For example, Marilyn Monroe was probably killed to shut her up,
Right.
keep her quiet. And so those would be just two examples right there. And there have been other unexpected deaths of prominent Hollywood figures over the last several decades. Those are just two that come to mind immediately. But I don't have any problem believing that the intelligence agencies send in the cleaners, so to speak, when someone like Marilyn Monroe or Stanley Kubrick, both of whom, because of the circles they moved in and the relationships they had with powerful and influential people or knowledgeable people, certainly knew things that the average person does not. And because of the high public profile they had, they probably reached a point where certain people decided to take them out to shut them up.
Now these bases. Now going back to our the topic, about these bases. Now,
Yes,
according to your research, there are any number, like probably dozens, if not hundreds, that are just in the United States. Okay,
there are a lot of them.
right. So
There are a lot
now
of
we have heard about this, COG, the continuity of government in the case of a nuclear war and all that sort of things. But just the size and magnitude of these installations and these facilities, it seems like it can't be just something that it's a contingency preparation. So they must serve some other major purpose. And if I recall, in one of your programs, you were also describing that they're not just places where people go to live, or that they actually have manufacturing facilities. Is that correct? Where they can pretty much manufacture anything. It's like there's a whole
well, that's
world right beneath our feet.
yes, that's what I've been told. One of the examples I was given, and understand, I have never worked on the inside of any of these programs. I've never had a security clearance. I've never been employed by one of these big corporations or government agencies, military or non-military. So I've never been on the inside of these things. My research is archival and also anecdotal in that I've interviewed a surprising spectrum of people over the last 20 years from all walks of life, some of whom actually worked in these programs and have been in the facilities. And one of the engineers told me that he spent his career as a mechanical engineer, I believe, or maybe electrical or both. In any event, working in these facilities, and there are people who spend their career in these facilities are quite large. And he described, according to him, the Cheyenne Mountain facility, what we see on TV and in Hollywood films, is just part of what is there. That's impressive enough in its own right. But he told me there are other levels below, going down much deeper, even deeper, larger, and more sophisticated, and that there are not just cutting edge manufacturing industrial facilities underground, but they're really science fiction like. And that the example he gave me was in the event that there was um, a need to jumpstart civilization all over again, to restart civilization. Instead of going back to the era of bows and arrows and chipping out arrowheads from flint by hand and hunting deer with bows and arrows and with spears, that it would jump ahead a few thousand years. It would go right back to about the 1960s or 1970s, if not before, in that, if not later, in that not just the blueprints, physical blueprints, but also digitized plans and raw materials, rubber, glass, steel, titanium, you name it, is all stockpiled down there. And also even materials more raw than that, the raw feedstock to make steel and all of these other things, meaning the coal and the coke and iron ore and all of that is down there, such that if they needed to make a generic automobile, for example, it wouldn't necessarily be a Stingray Corvette, but just a generic automobile with four wheels, two seats, a steering wheel, an engine, a transmission, etc. They could do that from scratch. They can make the rubber tires. They could make the transmission, the gears in the transmission. They could make the differential gears, all of that. They could make the engine block. They could machine the cylinders and the pistons. They could physically make the spark plugs. They would have the glass to make the ceramic part and the metal, the copper and what have you to make the metal part of it. They would be able to manufacture the gasoline. I mean, the wires, the steering wheel, everything from A to Z. Or if they needed to make a tabletop radio, they could make the either transistors or vacuum tubes. They could make the capacitors, the resistors, all of that. Or if they needed to make a record player or a CD player or a generic television, you name it.
Or medical supplies, or surgical
whatever.
equipment, anything like that.
Whatever. A locomotive, a railway locomotive.
Right.
Anything that they have these big manufacturing facilities underground. They have machine shops. They have foundries. It's all there, ready to go. And there's not just one or two of these. From what he told me, there are multiple facilities. I don't know how many total. He described about 5 or 6. For all I know, there are 50 or 60 or 100. But there are at least several of them,
And
and
he,
they're
he
not all.
himself might not have known of all of them, so
No, he would. He wouldn't because of the compartmentalization. He was just describing to me facilities he knew about in
right.
Colorado and Nevada and California, but his impression was there were multiple of these facilities in multiple regions of North America and mainland North America, so that it's all there. And people think, well, if there's all-out nuclear war, that's the end of it. Well, their point of view is no, because they'll start it all over again, and they'll hardly skip a beat. I mean, if you had to go back and live with 1970s or the technology in 1965, you could easily do that. I mean, you'd have fans, you'd have radios, you'd have record players, you'd have television, you'd have automobiles, you would have trains, etc. Telephones. He described all of this they can make it, and so technological civilization would begin right away, and they'd bring it right up into the second half of the 20th century. They wouldn't lose hardly any time at all.
No, I'm a bit of a science fiction movie and shows buff, and what I have also just from reading some stuff on the internet and through these programs, etc., what comes across is that they also have a veritable Noah's Ark of genetic material as well, from which they can reconstitute basically just about any species as well. So it's not just limited to manufacturing, devices. It can also they can also create life.
Well, that and also even more on a more prosaic level, there are many stories about cloning and genetic engineering and secret underground bases. By the way, I, I am very open to that. There's so many stories about it that I'm pretty sure it's going on. Um, with some, it appears, with some extraterrestrial involvement. But there's also on a more prosaic level, one of the anecdotal accounts that I was told while I was doing my research in this would have been in the late 90s or early 2000s, that during the Ronald Reagan administration, in one of the secret underground bases in the National Forest in California, this is up in the Sierra in California, that the agency involved went to Native American food seed sources in the southwestern United States, and got a very wide variety of seeds from food crops that Native American peoples have been growing traditionally over the centuries in the American Southwest, because those crops, those seeds from those crops, have greater genetic viability and vigor than the commercially available hybrid seeds that are on the market today. So that if they had to plant those seeds, they would have a much higher probability of getting some kind of viable crop, because there's been such great climatic variation in the Southwest. Sometimes it rains, sometimes you have years of drought, but through it all, these American Indian groups have survived and have continued farming and raising their melons and squash and corn and beans and other crops. And this is what they have, according to the story I was told, sequestered in at least one of the secret bases in the mountains in California.
Oh yes, that's it. And yeah, of course, we know about that famous facility in Norway where they have also stored all manners of grain seeds,
That's right.
and that's in itself is not a bad idea, especially with all the GMO crap that's going on. Which is making all the seed varieties we have today much more susceptible to diseases and such things. So to preserve an heirloom seed is actually a good idea, but the question is. In case of a catastrophe, would that be available to the masses? Which is the
No, sir. No, sir, it won't.
yes,
It won't.
that doesn't surprise us,
The
does it?
seeds and the seed vaults are not meant for the masses. The masses, at least in the United States and some other countries, are being fed genetically modified food at this point. So you can see right there what the plan is for the masses.
Well, can we say extinction?
Yes, because what is coming out with the research in recent years is that these genetically modified crops not only produce dangerous disease conditions, they tend to produce sterility after 2 or 3 generations.
Sterility in the people or in the crops?
No, in the organisms that consume them.
Ah, okay.
This is what's been found in hogs, for example, in lab rats, that in the first generation they get very diseased, they get cancer, and in fact we have a raging cancer epidemic. Um, and in subsequent generations, their offspring and the offspring of their offspring tend to become sterile and cannot reproduce. So, given the very wide consumption of genetically modified food, especially in the United States in recent years, is it any surprise we have a raging cancer epidemic, number one? And fertility rates are declining. Male sperm, for example, the sperm level, viable sperm level, is declining rapidly.
Right, right. Yes, yes. Well, before we perhaps we'll leave that for another time as to the spiritual and overarching reasons for all these things and why they're happening the way they are. Because I mean, it's quite apparent that the people that are, or at least the people that we think are running the show, they are uh, evil beyond comprehension. They're all like we are living sort of on the island of Dr. Moreau, and it's just mad scientists running amok everywhere. But we won't go there. One question I wanted to ask you, Richard, about these bases is it
Yes.
necessary that all of them have actually been excavated in modern times? Is it possible that some of these are just being reoccupied and they have existed
Yes,
since ancient times?
I think so. Um, I've caught whispers of that here and there. I've never had a scientist or engineer who's directly involved in these programs tell me that, but I have heard rumors that from time to time they have either broken into or pretty well known where they were going and have come across ancient tunnels and or ancient facilities that were built unknown thousands of years ago by unknown parties for unknown reasons. But yes, I think based on what I've heard, and I can't document any of that, but based on what I've heard, I think that some of that has gone on. Yes.
Now, I come from, I'm originally from India, and in that part of the world, especially in the Tibet region and around in the Himalayas, you hear stories about Shambhala and all these Agartha and all these underground places that are underground worlds, essentially, not just a small city or something, underground worlds that have existed in myth and legend for a very, very long time. So it seems like really is nothing new under the sun, that such things have indeed been going on since antiquity. And you're right, like, we don't know the exact time frame when they happened or who the parties involved in it were that dug this place up, but this is certainly just the latest episode in this saga that has been going on for a very long time.
Well, you're right, and I'm not a Vedic scholar, but I have read some of the Vedas, and you cannot read the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, for example, without encountering references to the celestials and to the hundreds of thousands of types of human beings that live in the universe, in the galaxy, and of their technological prowess, the technologies they have, the Vimanas, their aerial flying cars, their military weaponry, etc. And it's clear that many of these stories go back thousands of years. And in some, you talk to some Hindu yogis, and they will tell you that some of these stories even go back millions of years, which may be true. But nonetheless, it's clear that there are cycles of technological civilization on this planet, and they go way back. We don't even know the true history of the planet we live on. We are living deep in ignorance.
Yes, you are absolutely right. Now, this again is what you might call esoteric knowledge or occult knowledge that is hidden in plain sight, which is in the Bible. And this you don't hear at church, but according to the Bible, there have been at least three major epochs or three major ages in which massive, not just planetary, but cosmic destruction has taken place of very highly advanced. And the further back in time you go, the more technologically advanced those civilizations that predated us were. Okay. And of course, then we have the fourth episode, which would be the story of Noah's flood. And talking about that flood time, there was an interesting anecdote in your book, which I really enjoyed reading, which is about how the U.S. Navy has scoured the ocean floors for ancient artifacts?
Well, I don't know if they're ancient artifacts. This comes out of John Pena Craven's book, The Silent War. Uh, John Pena Craven was the highest level um, Navy research scientist. He's a PhD oceanographer. And during the height of the Cold War, from about the mid or late 1950s up into the early to mid 1970s, he was the highest level Navy research scientist. He was tasked um, with developing the capability in the post-World War II Navy of working down to the depth of 20,000 feet below the surface. That's like 4 miles deep, and carrying out major naval operations in that environment, which he did. He discusses some things in his book cryptically, of course, since he worked with classified, compartmentalized programs. Not everything he did is in his book. In fact, I assume that most of what he did is not in his book. But you can get a few ideas from reading his book, which I did. And one of the things he says is that the Navy, under his direction, undertook a submarine survey meaning an underwater survey of the ocean floor and the continental shelves all over the world. And that they charted, I forget the exact number, I think it was thousands of objects of interest. I forget his exact words.
Now, those objects of interest, they could be ancient artifacts, could they not?
I would assume some of them are.
Yeah.
I would assume some of it was Chinese and Russian technology, alien technology, ancient technology. I think it was because the language he used in describing what they did was they went out to look for technology and items of interest that were scattered around on the continental shelves and ocean floor all over the world. And he doesn't really specify exactly what those items were in his book. He leaves it very open, and I'm assuming that some of it would have been from previous civilizations because
I mean, when you reason it out, it is just not possible that these are just sunken Russian or Chinese craft if they're scattered all over
no.
over the
There
world.
was some of them. No, some of that was
Right.
Some of it would have been sunken submarines, Nazi submarines, and Japanese submarines,
Right.
Soviet submarines, etc. But because he didn't specify what it was, I'm assuming that
It was more than
yes,
just
so
that.
more than that, and more than terrestrial technology from the modern era. And so I am assuming, and there's a good deal of anecdotal evidence, including some very interesting evidence, that one of the things that the American military has gone after over basically the last century at least is crashed UFO technology. Now the water, most of the Earth's surface is covered by the oceans and the large seas and lakes, the vast majority of it. So, given that there have been apparently dozens, if not more, of these crash retrievals by various military agencies, mostly but not only in the United States, I'm assuming that they went after some of this stuff at sea as well that they detected.
Now, these may not necessarily have crashed in modern times. These craft themselves could be of great antiquity. Like if you're talking about some cosmic wars that occurred, like for example, as described in the Mahabharata or something like that, or even in the Bible,
yes,
that if these occurred in ages which have long gone, possibly thousands, maybe millions of years ago, then some of that technology may still be existing on the ocean floors, if nowhere else.
Oh, yes, sir.
So right now we were discussing these objects that the Navy was scouring for on the ocean floors. And if you recall that movie, I don't know if you ever saw it or not, that movie Waterworld with Kevin Costner.
Yes, I did.
Did you ever see that movie?
Yes, I did.
You remember that scene where he goes down and like there's a city like New York City on the bottom of the ocean floor. So I
I
mean,
don't I don't remember that particular scene, but
yeah, it was quite an it was quite a startling scene, and for that
yes.
reason alone, the movie itself was sort of mediocre, but there were some visuals in it that were very striking, and that was one of them, which is
Well,
always
this has been, the work of Graham Hancock, for example. I don't know if you've ever interviewed Graham Hancock, but he's written about the civilizations that existed before and the very enigmatic archaeological remains that have been found underwater in various regions around the world that prove that, in fact, there are submerged cities from previous civilizations that really do exist. And mainstream archaeology is not investigating it very much, doesn't have much to say about it, and yet these places do exist. The world has not always been as it is now, and the during the last ice age, for example, the sea level was something like 300 feet or 350 feet lower than it is now, and it appears that there were large cities built out on what would have been then the coastal plains of the various continents. But when the waters rose, those human areas of human habitation were submerged, and people had to move farther inland. So there was a flood. It didn't happen in 40 days and 40 nights. But it appears it took place over a period of years or decades, maybe even centuries. And the water may have come in and gone out and come in and gone out, but eventually over a period of a couple thousand years, it came in more than it went out, and now it's much higher than it was, say, 15,000 years ago.
But then yeah, that's what interested me in that was one of the statements that you had in your book was that this project that the Navy had undertaken, one of its objectives was undersea archaeology, and that by definition necessitates that they believe that there was something under the waters that is of an archaeological nature. It is not just something that's natural.
No, I'm not sure that I saw in my documentation anything specifically citing an undersea Navy archaeological program. It
No, no,
may,
it is. I'm quite sure. Like I'll send it to you on which page I read that in your book. It did say that. That's where I got it from. It's hidden in plain sight, and it talks about the Navy scouring the floor for undersea object, and it was somewhere.
well, that's true. That's true. There was a program where they surveyed the undersea for objects of interest, and artifacts and objects of interest. So yeah, that is an archaeological program. You're right,
Right.
broadly defined. I don't know if that entailed. I suspect it did, but I can't document conclusively that it did.
But they
Uh,
wouldn't come out and say that yes, there's all these ancient cities that are submerged in the waters underground because
but there are,
that would
there are.
upset the whole paradigm
It
of
would.
this evolutionary model that they have given us. So I mean,
One of the things I did find when I was doing my research was I did talk to some people who were involved at a high level in the Navy and also in other agencies and organizations. By high level, I mean they weren't admirals or anything like that, but that they worked in some of these programs, in compartmentalized programs. And one of these scientists told me that we got to talking about Atlantis, and I asked him if the stories about Atlantis were true. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no,
right.
but he said, if you were going to look for Atlantis, you might look on the Atlantic seafloor to the west of Gibraltar, a few hundred miles. And in fact, there have been some discoveries in recent years of some very interesting geometrically regular grids on the seafloor a few hundred miles out in the Atlantic Ocean to the west of Gibraltar, as well as other places around the world. Um, I rather suspect that even today there's a thriving lot of activity on the seafloor, let's put it that way, all over the world. But that Atlantis, or at least part of what we might think of as Atlantis, was out in the mid-Atlantic west of Gibraltar. Um, he suggested I pursue that. I didn't have the time or the financial means to do it at that point, and I may never. But that's certainly one of the places that I would look. The issue with that type of research is that the research site is thousands of feet below the surface of the
Right,
ocean.
right, yeah,
So that right there adds a huge layer of difficulty.
of course, of course. And you know what? You have read reports of these submerged, man-made structures, and actually, I've seen photographs of some of them off the coast of Japan, which are indisputable. But also, like heard reports of these kind of sort of places, and close to the Bahamas, close to Cuba, and but eventually nothing ever comes out of it. They just sort of disappear into the, you know, into the mist of history, so to
Well,
speak.
well here's the reality. It takes a lot of money and equipment to research those sites. And, not thousands of dollars, but tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars or more.
Or millions, yes.
Yes, and I don't have that kind of money, and no one's really going to give you that kind of money. So the issue is that you may make a discovery, but absolutely lack the funding to follow up on it. That's just the reality of the world we live in. And the reason people lack that funding and can't obtain it is because the gatekeepers, as soon as they learn that a discovery has been made, clamp the lid down hard to keep the information from getting out. And one of the ways they clamp the lid down is by preventing the people who make the discovery from obtaining funding to continue their research.
Yep, agreed, agreed. Now, these one more before we go. I want to give you an opportunity to, tell us all about your website and such, and where people can order your books. But before we do that, another interesting fact that you mentioned in your book is about these submersibles that go down to like 20,000 feet, which you mentioned earlier in the program, which is almost
Yes.
like 4 miles. Uh, Now, the water pressure at that depth must be enormous indeed. So, is it just like some sort of strong alloy or something that's preventing these things from collapsing? Or do you think there's also some kind of technology that involves some sort of force field that surrounds these vessels as they go down that prevents that sort of pressure being exerted on it?
Yeah, you're right. At that depth, you have like thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch. It's phenomenal. And what I discovered in my research is that at great depth, pure glass, uh, glass that's fabricated with a very high level of quality control, is stronger than the strongest structural steel, like 20 times stronger. So my research suggests, and John Pena Craven provides some hints in his book, The Silent War, that in the process of developing the technology to work at very great depth, work and excavate and construct things at thousands of feet down beneath the surface of the sea, that early on the U.S. Navy discovered that constructing structures with pure high quality glass actually made a lot of sense, because glass under great pressure is far stronger than the strongest structural steel. Now, this is opposite to our perceived wisdom,
Right.
received wisdom. We assume that steel is stronger than glass because you can take a steel crowbar and smash a pane of glass, and so
Right.
we assume steel is much stronger than glass. Undersea, that's not true. Undersea, deep undersea, pure glass is far stronger than the strongest steel. It's the other way around. And so I assume, based on the hints that he drops in his book, that what they work with deep undersea is pure glass
Hmm.
because it's so strong. Now, he did say that Edward Teller, the father, in that book, he said that Edward Teller, the father of the H bomb, um, of course, Edward Teller worked at a very high level of the military-industrial complex, and so did John Pena Craven, and so they interfaced. John Edward Teller had asked him to construct nuclear missile silos made of glass embedded in the seafloor. I'm assuming there probably are
Right.
glass nuclear missile silos on the ocean floor. Um, and he also discussed their plans, their research and design to make submersibles out of glass. Um, I'm assuming some of that has been done as well. I would assume there's an entire deep undersea technology made of glass. And of course, this has implications for making domes on the ocean floor out of glass. I'm sure the average person would think, oh, they're thinking of a greenhouse with glass panes. They think if you would make a structure out of glass on the ocean floor, that it would just be squashed like an egg cell in a fraction of a second. On the contrary, it would be extremely strong. If it were properly designed and properly engineered, it would be extremely strong, almost indestructible, and made of solid glass. So, pardon me,
That's very
I'm,
interesting.
I'm assuming that's been done. And he drops those in his books. And of course, in the course of my research, I also ran across anecdotal accounts of domed cities in the deep ocean, not necessarily of terrestrial human construction, but built by others.
That's like in that movie in the one of the Star Wars movies where they have this whole underground city and in the lake. So that yeah, again, those kind of stories are found in just about every culture. So I'm sure there's some truth to it. They may not necessarily be constructed by the U.S. Navy, but I, for one, would tend to believe that they do exist.
Well, what we've had in recent years, uh, running back at least to the late um, 20th century and first years of the 21st century, we've had trillions of dollars that have gone missing, that have been unaccounted for. Um, in the United States federal government system alone, not counting what's going on in other parts of the world, but even in the United States federal government system, trillions of dollars that have turned up missing and unaccounted for. And the money is going somewhere. It's being used for something. The obvious conclusion, the logical conclusion is that it's going into covert programs, clandestine projects, the black budget compartmentalized operations, uh, part of which would be comprised in the kinds of things we've been discussing in this interview. Just vast sums of money, Paul, are being
Right.
sucked off out of sight. They're going into, I believe, literal high-tech holes in the ground, and probably also to a very advanced parallel secret space program or parallel secret space programs, plural.
Yes, I would. Most people they're not even aware that the U.S. Air Force has a space command, and therefore, it's quite obvious that there is a sophisticated space program that already exists, and that is not just a space shuttle. It's far more advanced than that. So again, I want to interject here and state that back in 2014, I did believe in a lot of these stories that are spread out there about these secret space programs and all these massive nuclear arsenals and such things, okay, which I no longer believe, okay. And I believe a lot of people like this Richard Sauder, they are fed a lot of false information which they might themselves actually believe. And if the information is coming from a military source, that's the first warning sign that it is almost 100% of the time going to be false. So all these things about, there's a secret space program and there's bases on Moon and Mars, it's all fiction. It's all Hollywood fiction. There is no truth in these. However, on this Earth itself, we do have, which I will show you at the end of this video, the Bible tells us where all we find intelligent life, and not just, man, flesh and blood man, but other creatures as well. That is the reason why I believe that these worlds under the ground and under the waters, in the mountains, etc., do really exist. But these are almost certainly few, if any of them, have actually been built from scratch by something like the U.S. military.
I wrote a little book called The Richard Sauder Briefing. It went out of print a year or two ago. It came out in German first, actually, and English second. And it's just a little briefing book, really short and easy to read. There wasn't much interest in it, so it's gone out of print. But one of the things that I discuss in that book is that there have been at least 3 separate documented military manned space programs parallel to the space program, NASA manned space program, going back to the 1950s, with the Dinosaur program, which started the United States Air Force. Neil Armstrong is allegedly the first man to walk on the moon. Whether he did or he didn't is a subject of another conversation. But he came over to the NASA manned space program from the United States Air Force manned space program, the Dinosaur, so-called Dinosaur program, in the 1950s, early 1960s. He was an Air Force astronaut and came to NASA already as an astronaut from the Air Force program to the NASA program. And then there were two other United States military manned space programs parallel to what NASA is doing, that have been publicly documented. I am assuming that the United States military and perhaps other organizations as well have had for decades their own parallel manned space program that also has been putting up astronauts into space to do secret things that we don't know about.
Yes,
and I provide the documentation for that. In fact, and I've been told that quietly, and it's interesting by more than one person. It's interesting that I found that documentation on the public record. And number two, that Gary McKinnon, the so-called hacker from England, about 10 years ago or a little more, was arrested and almost extradited. He had to fight for his life for years to prevent being extradited from Britain to the United States because he hacked into government computer systems in the United States, military and non-military. And in one of those systems, he actually found secret records for a parallel manned space program and an offshore fleet of ships, an off-planet fleet of ships, and a parallel officer structure, off-planet officers, evidently in the American Navy. And this exists parallel to NASA and parallel to the open, more public Navy command structure. And for that, he was arrested and almost extradited to the United States, where he would have been imprisoned certainly for decades in a federal prison, American federal prison. So if there's nothing to see, why did they go ape shit and try to bury this man in some maximum security prison in the United States? It's because he stumbled across something that they would rather people not know about, which is probably only one of their secret space programs.
So one of the reasons I've re-uploaded this video after about 8 years is that perhaps, there is some true information in here. The truth is that, yeah, there is an underworld. That's basically the truth. Everything else is probably that Richard Sauder has documented. Everything is probably all false, okay? Especially the story about this Gary McKinnon dude from the UK who was just sitting in his girlfriend's apartment and was able to hack into these Pentagon computers and everything. These stories, man, people don't realize that the Pentagon and the British MI5, etc., they got like a whole departments full of fiction writers, and their job basically is to come up with these stories, and then they put a face to it and they make the story. Okay, now if they had a secret space program, they would of course have secret computers too, which would not be linked to any of the networks or whatever, and there would be nobody would be able to with there with our internet connections. We would never be able to access any of that. So, and it's all lies. All these lies are carefully manufactured and created. There's again that, that episode of News Benders, which was a great episode where they talked about, how they're going to manufacture news 5 years in advance, etc. That is absolutely the truth. That, they recruit kids right out of Oxford and Cambridge and, Stanford and Harvard and everything else, or the English literature, whatever, students and stuff like that. And that's what they hire them. They pay them well, and they are recruited to basically come up with these stories. And then, these stories are fed to people like Richard Sauder, who don't exercise enough critical thinking, and they go out and spread them all over. And before you know it, there's like a whole bunch of alternative media, useful idiots, we could say, that are out spreading the lie. And these people in the background who know that this is all fiction, they're laughing their rear ends off, drinking champagne and smoking big fat cigars. So we have secret space programs, we have secret Navy programs, we have secret, subterranean programs. It's just like there's secrets everywhere. Did you find that the world, especially the official world, has become far more secretive, and it's much more hard to find documentation beyond the late 60s or so? Like, you have a lot of your documentation that you coded came out in the from it was in the 1960s or 50s, but beyond
Well,
after that.
not all of it. Not all of it. A fair amount, but not only then. A fair amount is from later years as well.
But one would, what I'm trying to say is that one would think that with the advancements of technology which are in the public realm, okay, that's which is not in the public domain, they must necessarily have been exponentially greater. But it seems that it's much more difficult to find any sort of documentation to back that up.
Well, there's been a lot of cleaning of archives, and it has become physically more difficult to access archives than
Right.
it used to be. Under the Barack Obama government, for example, it has become far more difficult to access information than it was 10 or 20 years ago. It would be much harder for me to conduct the research I did 20 years ago today. In fact, I would say it would be extremely difficult.
That's what I was trying to say. That is far more the difficulty in accessing.
It's bureaucratic.
Right.
There have been bureaucratic controls that have been imposed, in part because of researchers like me and Ryan Wood and his father, Dr. Wood, who have found a lot of information about crash retrievals of UFOs by American military agencies. There's my book, my work on the underground bases, and other people have done work on James Banford's work, for example, on the NSA. He's produced a couple of very well-researched books on the NSA and all of its spying. And now in the last year or so, you've had Edward Snowden come out. And so more and more, the power structure is becoming alarmed at the amount of information that's coming out. And now they're going into a mode where they're starting to clamp down. And so I may have had a good window of opportunity to do a body of research in a time frame of 10 to 20 years ago that today would be extremely difficult to carry out because of the bureaucratic roadblocks that are being put in place.
I mean, one time myself was kind of like a useful idiot spreading these lies, but now I sort of laugh at it, when people make claims like the power structure is getting alarmed. No, they're not. The power structure is not a man, is not a flesh and blood power structure. The Bible is quite clear on that, that is principalities and powers. And they have planning that for, decades and centuries ahead. So, you know what? No, this is everything that is all these researchers that he mentioned about these crashed UFO craft and everything else. These are all very carefully crafted fiction, and that is, that's what the research is, documentation. If any of this stuff again was real, there would be no documentation that would be accessible to researchers such as Richard Sauder or these other guys that he is mentioning. Okay, so again, I have come to learn that our world is, the lies in it are so prevalent and so extreme that people would not believe it even if you showed it to them, gave them all the evidence that this is a lie. People won't believe it. But I have come to understand it, that the father of, as the Bible tells us, the God of this world is the father of lies, and lies are everywhere, especially in the alternative media area. So as technology evolves, so do the deceptions. And one big deception that is headed our way is, of course, this AI, artificial intelligence deception. Okay, this artificial intelligence, of course, is that Terminator is going to become intelligent and destroy the world. It's all a lie. There's always some power, whether it is a man, flesh and blood power, or it is not. That is a different question. But there's always some intelligence that is in control of every machine, and therefore this whole machine learning AI is coming for you. It is one big deception. So I'm going to end this here. That's pretty much the end of the interview, but I'm going to do a reading from Revelation chapter 5 verse 13 to show you that all the information that Richard presented in this here, it is, I no longer believe anything that cannot be confirmed by the Bible. And the information that he presents, some of it is confirmed by the Bible, which tells us, and every creature which is in heaven and on the earth and under the earth, and such are as in the sea, and all that are in them, heard us saying, blessing and honor and glory and power be unto him that sitteth upon the throne and unto the Lamb forever and ever. So, this basically gives us four places that Richard talked about. In heaven, which is what he's talking about, these, the space program, etc., which is what happens is all information is based on certain truths. So there is truth in there that up above us in the atmosphere, and up above that there are places. There is of course the city of God, which is called heaven, from where his throne is located and from which he administers and controls all of creation. And below that there are heavenly places which also have other creatures that inhabit those places, including some evil ones called principalities and powers. And then he said creature which is in heaven and on the earth. On the earth, of course, is on the surface of the earth, which for the most part is a reference to the race of man. And then it says under the earth. Okay, so Richard again talked about the underground world. Okay, and then finally in the sea, and he talked about the undersea bases. So that's the reason why I posted this interview. However, where I disagree very strongly is that for the construction and the maintenance of all these places is attributed to human powers, to man powers, such as, the U.S. military or the intelligence agencies or some corporations, the Vatican, etc., whatever. All the people, the flesh and blood component of this is almost inconsequential, because the ultimate powers that control, the ultimate power that controls everything is, of course, the Lord God, for whom everything exists to serve his purposes, including these evil creatures. But as far as these powers of man are concerned, they are 100% controlled by these evil principalities and powers, who are located both above us in the heavenly places and also in the ground and in the sea, as we can read again in Revelation chapter 13, from which let me just quickly read to you that about these creatures, which is the time of the so-called Antichrist. And what does it tell us in Revelation 13, chapter 1? It says, and I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea. Okay, these are creatures that are worlds that exist in the sea, and that technical information that is presented about these worlds that are constructed of some kind of indestructible glass. Maybe there is some truth in that. There's no way for us to confirm it, but there may be. And then it says here so this is the one that comes out of the sea, and then of course there is another one which comes out of the earth itself. So again, in the same chapter of Revelation chapter 13, in verse 11, it says, "And I beheld another beast coming out of the sea." These beasts that are being referred to here in mythology, the one that comes out of the sea is Poseidon and Neptune, and of course the one that comes out of the earth is Hades. Okay, so these worlds are real, these creatures are real, a lot of them are not mankind, but they exist, and all this information is out there. But again, people like Richard Sauder are used to basically muddy the water and attribute all these powers to, some kind of human agency when nothing could be further from the truth. Anyhow, you guys all have a wonderful day, and this is Paul Sandhu.
Oh Lord, my God, when I in awesome wonder to view this world, your mighty hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the roaring thunder, thy power throughout the universe displayed. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art! Oh, how great thou art! Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art! How great thou art! Then he shall come with shouts of acclamation and take us home. What joy shall fill my heart? Then I shall bow in humble adoration and then proclaim, my God, how great thou art. Then sing